everybody. So we are here to continue in our discussions about Star Trek Discovery. This is the episode entitled Leith and Lethe. Oh, sorry. Lethe. Okay. Lethe. And this is episode 6. And it's an interesting episode because it's very divisive, as the show has turned out to be. It was just fascinating to me that on Entertainment Weekly on EW.com, they give it an A- this episode and says it's that the show's 6th installment assuaged doubts about the show's emotional edge, putting science on the back burner in favor of tense psychological drama. And it's as good an hour as the show has produced yet. So that's one side of the thing. And then we have at Forbes, their review says it says that characters behaving the opposite way of how we're told they behave, black and white ethical situations, very little depth to the story or the characters. It's very much as though someone wrote an interesting plot outline, then it was turned into a joke of a space nightmare by a combination of poor writers and directors and some very good actors. So it's just very, very interesting, but I got ahead of myself. So Tom is here to talk about this with me. And so which side of the spectrum do you land on with Lethe this episode?
Definitely more Entertainment Weekly side. Yeah.
Yeah. It's fascinating to me. Why do you think that it is so divisive?
I can't even tell. Well, the thing is, like, we're messing with they're messing with stuff that many people have come to hold sacred. Like,
yeah,
this is intruded more on the original series than I think any other episode so far.
Right.
In terms of like dealing with characters and situations at the beating heart of the original series. So yeah, I think you're sensing some freak out around that. But like, I want to go find that Forbes review because frankly, that little clip was completely perplexing. It was one of those, sometimes you read a review you disagree with so hard, you're like, we're talking about the same thing, right?
It's amazing.
It reminds me of that time that the New York Times did a review of Westworld. They're like, yeah, it's really confusing. It makes no sense. And then they had to print a retraction the next day saying that like the reviewer had watched the episodes out of order. That's why it didn't make any sense.
Oh.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, this is a guest. Yeah, this is a guest contributor. It's not one of their regular writers. It's a scientist. Yeah. And I'm wondering how, because there are some typos and different things that seem a little weird. And he keeps calling her Lily instead of which seems strange for instead of Tilly. So
okay.
So I think so I immediately
big grain of salt with that.
Yeah. That so it's interesting. It's a the guy who wrote it, where is it? Let me find it. He's a scientist or something. He's not a says astrophysicist and author Ethan Siegel. Anyway, he's written books Technology and Beyond the Galaxy. So there you go.
Okay.
A hardcore fan.
Okay.
But anyway, I just interesting.
The thing is, like, there are some things that some people like different things about Star Trek, and that's fine. Mm-hmm. If you don't like more emotional stories, I guess that's one thing. But then there's also this. I think he's sort of reflecting some fan outrage at sacred ground being tread here. So.
Yeah. So it's interesting. We'll talk about that. And I'm also like you. I definitely side more with the EW review. I actually loved this episode. I thought it was amazing. I thought that it was emotional. I thought it was really well acted, really well done. I was engrossed. I was excited. I thought it was beautiful. I don't know. I just really enjoyed it. I thought it was great. So, anyway, so it starts out with the Burnham. You see Burnham and Tilly running, and she's sort of training Tilly on how to become a captain. And do you have any thoughts about that kind of part of the episode?
No, it was cool. I liked that we see the mentor-mentee relationship kind of growing, and
Mm-hmm.
um, I like the shout out to the Enterprise. It also kind of deepens Starfleet a little bit. It gives you a sense of like, okay, if you were in Starfleet, how in the 23rd century, how would you go about becoming a captain if that's what you want to
Yeah.
do? And it's kind of cool how she sort of outlines, okay, this is what you do.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I like the way that she said that everybody will have uh, personality, and everybody will have, you've got to be physically and mentally prepared. You got to be better than everybody else. That was good, and it kind of led right into sort of her story, her backstory of her own sort of training and her not, getting accepted, and her conflicted feelings about it. Here, her training Tilly, I thought sort of worked well as a narrative.
Yeah, no, I liked how they wrapped up that arc where Michael comes to apologize to Tilly and says, like, look, I didn't, I think basically the subtext of what she was saying was, my father tyrannized me with his expectations. I don't want to tyrannize you with mine.
Yeah.
And what was so cool was that was about Michael forgiving herself and getting over it. Because Tilly's just like, no, I'm cool. I'm good. I got self-esteem coming out my butt. I don't need your approval. I'm okay.
Yeah.
I thought that was great.
Yeah, I did too. I really did. And so basically, then you have the Vulcans are sending Sarek and a companion to go to meet with the Klingons. They are trying to, it's like a peace meeting that they're trying to do. So they're, with Sarek being closer to Michael, to Burnham, she all of a sudden like collapses and has this like mind warp. I forget what they call it, but she has this vision with where she kind of gets into Sarek's head, and
She's kind of feeling what Sarek's feeling, yeah.
Yeah, and so yeah, she sort of collapses, and we get a couple of these sequences sort of throughout the episode out where she sees sort of, I think, sort of her side of this experience of the Vulcan, kind of academy, and she, she gets sent to Starfleet instead. She doesn't get accepted, and it's this, sort of devastating experience for her. And and so yeah, it's an interesting thing, because they are this particularly even mentioned Spock in this scene. What did you think about sort of this with Sarek and Burnham and sort of this experience?
I thought that was really cool the way they handled it, in the sense that I like that you saw it. I like that Burnham. I like the change that Burnham goes through in the course of the episode. I like how at first she's only thinking about herself and how it applies to her. And this is how we think about our parents, right? Until we get to a certain age, we're only thinking about them in terms of how what they've done or the decisions they've made affected us. And we tend not to think of our parents as people, right? And this is what was so beautiful about this episode, because this is an experience that's so universal. It's something that it cuts across so many lines. I identified so much with this. But yeah, so Burnham has to forget about herself for a second and realize that this is Sarek dying. His death for Sarek is about Sarek, right? And we all we're all the star of our own movie. Everybody else is an extra, right? So she has to recognize that, yeah, that's how he thinks about himself and how he thinks about the situation. So what's his name? His name is escaping me right now. The new guy from Seattle, which I thought that was cool that Seattle got a shout out.
You mean
Lieutenant Ash
Tyler? Ash Tyler, yeah.
Yeah. Okay. God. Okay. So anyway, yeah, I like how Tyler kind of stops her and says, "No, wait a second. Stop thinking about how that situation affected you, because that's not what he would be thinking about. That makes no sense." And that's when she turns the corner. So I thought that whole change for Michael was cool, and framing it in that situation was great.
Yeah, I really liked that quote. I think he says, I wrote it down. He says, "Why is he thinking of your failure? Where's the logic of that?" And he says, "I've been close to death, and you think about who you love and what you've done differently. What does he wish he'd done differently now?" So, and yeah, it's interesting that Michael sort of evolve in her understanding of who her, who her Sarek was, and that he really did love her in a way that she didn't understand. And so I really appreciate that in this episode. And but at first she's kind of bitter about it, kind of or confused at the very least. And so she's in
Mhm.
she's in this thing. Can you explain what Contra is in the show as far as this idea of Contra?
The Katra is the Vulcan soul. Katra.
Contra,
So
sorry.
if you remember from Star Trek 3, um,
Mm-hmm.
at the end of Star Trek 2, Spock does a mind meld with McCoy just before he sacrifices himself to save the ship, right?
Right.
And then Spock is, quote, dead. In Star Trek 3, McCoy is walking around talking like Spock and like he's slipping into Spock speak. Um, and that's because he's carrying around Spock's soul in his body. And the point of that movie is to get, I like the way McCoy puts it, I'm carrying his marbles, right?
Mm.
So the oh, I've got all his marbles is the word, is the line. But anyway, so the whole point is to get Spock's regenerating body from Planet Genesis, take McCoy and Spock's new body to Vulcan and merge them. Um, so what's happened, and this is what's cool, is that we get a little bit of clarification on stuff we saw in the pilot that was a little odd and confusing, right? So how is she
Okay.
talking to Sarek? What? This mysticism doesn't, like, this is weird. This doesn't totally match with what we think we know about Vulcan mysticism. So what's that about? Well, now we know. She was attacked by Vulcan extremists and was actually dead, completely dead.
Three
And
minutes. Yeah.
Sarek, yeah, and Sarek saved her by patching a bit of his own katra into hers, into her body, right? And so he's literally a part of her.
Hmm. Okay. Yeah, so they're still connected, and the closer they get to each other, the more connected that they are.
Yeah,
And
yeah,
it seems like this would be something
yeah.
she would
And they
have
can. And
realized before, right? She would have had this experience many times, I would
no,
think.
she did know that. Yeah,
Okay.
she
Okay.
did. We saw that she had that experience in the pilot where she's, yeah.
Mhm.
There is a holographic conversation with Sarek
That's right.
in the pilot, but there's also a psychic one
Mm-hmm.
where
That's
he's
right.
meeting with her in a kind of a weird psychic realm, right? And that's actually what Stamets was sort of geeking out about is,
Mm.
whoa, well, seriously, you can do that with a Vulcan soul? Like, what does that mean metaphysically? Like, and he's kind of getting excited about it. And then Lorca interrupts with like, we have exactly no time to, debate what this means
Mm.
about
Okay.
Earth or
Yeah,
life or
that's right.
anything.
I forgot about that. That's right. That's right. Okay, so basically, she has this first experience, and she relives this experience from her youth, and then Ash and Telly and Burnham all go to get Sarek, and and this
Right.
is something that Cornwell is totally against. She's against this mission. She's very frustrated by it. What did you think of her character in this episode of Cornwell?
Um, I think she's conflicted. So like on the one hand, she has to talk to him. It's, this is a situation that I've run into in my personal life or that I've seen up close anyway, where, my wife and I help run a business that my wife and her business partner are running.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and I see up close where like they hire people that they think will do a good job, but then they may become friends with those people.
Right,
Well, but then gets sticky because they have to treat them both as a friend and as boss,
right.
and there has to be a clear line. And so you kind of see Cornwell walking that line or trying to.
Mm-hmm.
with Lorca. And that's kind of different. Like we've never seen that in an admiral captain relationship in Trek before,
Mm-hmm.
where they really are friends. They really like each other to the point that
Mm-hmm.
it's almost a romantic relationship.
Yeah.
We've never seen that before, so that's kind of neat.
Mm-hmm. Interesting. Why do you think she's so opposed to to this mission and what Lorca and what they're trying to do?
Well, for the reasons that Starfleet is opposed to it, because I think they feel like they've got a tiger by the tail with Lorca,
Mm.
right? Because he's this guy who's gone through really traumatic things, and he's got the most powerful weapon in the Federation has, at his fingertips. And
Mm-hmm.
what is he going to do with it?
Yeah. Yeah, and at this point in my notes, I wrote just beautiful episode. These scenes where like the ship is just surrounded by this like pink and blue, and like I don't know, I just thought it was so beautiful. The cinematography, the visual effects, I just thought it looked gorgeous in
Yeah, I
this
agree.
episode, and yeah, and it was interesting because I think they Cornwell and Lorca did have really good chemistry, and I think that you did feel like they really cared about each other, and that they both weren't. They were both being like honest with each other, but also like sort of not wanting to hurt each other. If that makes sense. I don't know.
Yeah.
I just thought it was really, really good. It feels like Sarek is very disappointed in her, that she's just this letdown because she didn't make it into the academy, right? Didn't make it in
Into
as an
the Vulcan Expeditionary Force, which is
expedition.
kind of the space exploration agency of the Vulcan
Yeah.
people, right?
So that's what's really interesting is she thinks that he's very disappointed in her, but in reality, it turns out he's more disappointed in himself, really, for what he did. So she goes into his mind. That's when we get the line of why is he thinking of your failure at this time when he could die, and and so we find out that he's basically given this sort of Sophie's choice by the Vulcan leadership that you can't have two of his children into this expedition group, and so he's forced to pick between Spock, who is half human, half Vulcan, and Burnham, and so he picks Spock. And so, how did you feel about that?
Oh, it was really interesting and exciting because the conflict between Sarek and Spock goes way back, right? It's something that it's introduced in the original series,
Mm-hmm.
um, and Sarek and Spock are both pretty stubborn guys, and their relationship is always rocky, and it stretches clear into the next generation as well. There's next generation episodes about them. It's like this crosses over. Like I said, this is sacred ground for Trekkies. The conflict between Spock and Sarek,
Mm.
and there's a whole new dimension that's just been added to that, and that new dimension is Michael Burnham. This is an element of the story we've never heard before.
Right.
And
And
and what's cool about it too is that like you've got a situation, you got Sarek in a situation that a lot of people are facing now in the world political climate right now. How does a parent make the best decisions for their children in the face of xenophobia?
mm-hmm. At this point, that Spock did not choose to go to join the Vulcan force. So the decision that Sarek had to make was null and void, I guess. It was all for nothing because Spock chose to join Starfleet anyway. Yeah.
Deepens the pathos. It deepens the agony that Sarek must be in, and when
Yeah.
and it deepens the conflict. It because it's not just because what we've gone from is understanding that, oh well, Sarek had these certain expectations for his son, and he saw too much of himself in his son and was trying to live through his son. But Spock didn't go with that program. So, it's the old story where a parent tyrannizes their children with their own expectations or whatever.
Yeah.
And now this goes way beyond that. This is much deeper than that, because Sarek was so committed to that idea of Spock joining the Vulcan Expeditionary Force that he was willing to sacrifice something very dear to him in order to make that happen. And Spock spit in his face.
Yeah. It's really interesting. It's really interesting, especially when you think about this, again, this quote of what does he wish he'd done differently? And this is obviously going to be the one thing that he wishes he had done differently. But yeah, so basically what I liked is she goes from feeling like she was the one that disappointed Sarek to realizing that he's the one that feels like he disappointed her. And so she comes to understand the humanity of her own father, or her father figure, which I think is really beautiful, and something that I think happens to all of us at one point, or should happen to all of us at one point or another, where our parents stop becoming the authority figure and actually become like a human being who, like, wow, that must have been a really hard experience for them, or that. Whereas like when you're young, you feel like your parents are just hypocrites all the time. Like, how can they tell me what to do? And look, they just screwed up. They just made a mistake. They just, how can they be the boss? Or at least if you're independent, like some of us are, you feel that way.
Well, because then when you're, because to start with, when you're 3 or 4, they're gods to you. They can do no wrong when you're that age. But you're quickly disillusioned by that, because of course they're not.
Yeah, well, and when you're a teenager, that's when I think it feels like, oh, well, they're hypocrites. They're telling me what to do, how to live my life, but look at all the mistakes they're making. So I think when you have that moment, when you realize they're just like me, they were just trying to do the best they could. They were just, then I don't know. It's just an interesting moment. And I like the way that they showed that here. I thought it was really beautiful. I was moved by it. And
I absolutely love that moment where she's trying to get him to talk about it in the aftermath of this. Talk about what they both experienced in that psychic space, and he won't. He wants to kind of say, "Oh, what are you talking about? I have no idea what you mean." Right? And she's like, "Come on," and she's going, I expected more from you. You can do better, but I won't push you.
Yeah.
She high fives Spock out the door,
Yeah. There's only so much I can expect from this person. She even says, I think, we'll have this conversation one day, Father. Yeah. That was really good. That was really good. Yeah. And
she reaches a level of maturity that I'm not so sure we ever did with Spock. And in fact, I want to go back and look at the record and try to see if Spock ever maybe reached that point. Maybe I can intuit a point where Spock was able to kind of move on, I guess.
Yeah. That's why Spock was he had to work so hard to like become emotional, because he just had to kind of shut that side of him. I know that that's partly how Vulcans are, but I don't know. I think he probably had to shut sort of that side of himself off with I don't know, this experience with his father and letting his father down and different things like that. We do flip back and forth between what's going on with Lorca and what's going on with Burnham. And Cornwell does say, I've watched you change these last few months. You've changed. And she says, I can't leave Starfleet's most powerful weapon in the hands of a broken man.
Very well acted, that whole scene.
Yeah, very well acted. And like I said, I felt like they had such chemistry together and really felt like friends and people who cared about each other, and that you could see sort of this PTSD sort of idea, I think, with Lorca, that he wasn't really willing to deal with completely, that he was kind of in denial about. But obviously, as soon as his scars get touched, like, he has this like huge reaction with grabbing the phaser and everything, and this very, very strong reaction.
The response was a bit out of proportion to the situation.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. So, okay, so Cornwell ends up going to meet Sark is wounded, very, very wounded. Uh, but they get him onto the ship. And so Cornwell decides to go and meet with the Klingons instead of the Vulcans. And the Cornwell says that she wants Lorca to step down and get help when she returns. But the Klingons basically they massacre everybody but Cornwell who's in this expedition, and the Klingon says, "I was hoping to get a high-ranking Vulcan, but she is much better." And that this whole thing was basically like a trap to capture them. It wasn't really a peace negotiation at all. So yeah, it's gonna be interesting to see what happens next.
Yeah, and it's this is another way I feel like this series is adding layers of dimension and appreciation to what we already have in Star Trek. So, in the original series, the Klingons are kind of the stand-in for the Soviet Union. They always have kind of these Cold War standoffs with them. And in Star Trek 6, you get Kirk going, Spock says, "Oh, they're all going to die." He's like, "Let them die." Don't believe them, don't trust them, and you see he's like, wow, he's foaming at the mouth. Why? Well, if you've been through this crap, if you read the captain's logs around this, you'd be like, oh boy, there's never going to be future Klingons. They're a mess. Just don't even go near that.
Yeah.
So it's now Kirk's attitude is completely understandable. And in a way, like the fanboy in me is I'm starting to realize that I'm getting the Klingons I wanted. I'm getting the backstabbing, ambitious, no holds barred Klingons that you kind of come to, that you get to know in the original series. Like they're not worried about torture, or that's their honor does not put them above torture or dirty tactics or any of that. In the Next Generation and in subsequent series, you get a sense that like, oh no, they do have an internal code and they're not such bad blokes after all, because the Federation's at peace with them. But yeah, now we're getting the vicious, nasty Klingons as bad guys, for sure.
Yeah, you really see.
I'm kind of enjoying that.
Yeah, you really see that these are people at war. Like this is a savage group here.
Yeah.
And so it's going to be, interesting to see what happens next with Cornwell and with Lorca and with everything. I'm curious to see how Lorca's PTSD, or for lack of a better word, how that's going to come into play now when his friend and this person who wants him to step down and everything, how all these conflicted emotions, how that's all going to come into play now that she's captured. And also they have Sarek, and you have all of this interesting stuff going on between Burnham and her, and him, and I don't know. It's just there's a lot of interesting things, I think, going into the next episode. And yeah. I was just, I don't know. I was just really moved by it. I thought it was really engrossing. I just really enjoyed it. So the next episode is Magic to Make the Sanest Man Go Mad. So that is a very interesting title. So
with the long title, so it does have an original series vibe to it. So
yeah. So, all right. Well, I would give, this was my favorite episode of the season so far. I really liked it a lot. And so, yeah, we just have 3 more left to talk about and of this season. And I found out, so basically, like, they're doing this season in 2 batches. So they're going to have the first 9 now, and then I think in the spring, I guess there's going to be another batch of this season, is what I read. And then we just found out that that the series has been renewed for season 2. So that's very exciting.
Yeah.
Yeah, just found out yesterday. So I'm really I'm really
lives.
glad. So yeah, Star Trek lives. So I'm excited to hear that news. So all right, well, great. Well, we will talk next week. And where can people find you?
On Twitter at Amano Roboto. You can also find my verse inspired by Disneyland at Happy Place Poems, also on Twitter.
Great. Okay, yeah, you can find me at Smiling LDS Girl on social media, and you can find Rachel's reviews on iTunes. So definitely check that out. And thanks so much for talking with me about Star Trek Discovery.
My pleasure.